Following our last video on the circle, we're going to explore a related technique, the Windthauw. Fundamentally, the Windthauw is used to defeat an attack from above. This can be a cut directly down, or more typically from the opponent's right side, though it can also be used against an attack from the left, and even against a thrust. The technique is comprised of a cut from below, a winding out with a descending cut, and then a cross cut through the opposite diagonal. The cut from below has a few parameters to consider. First, an opponent. You'll notice that by stepping in and cutting from below, I'm actually stepping into danger here. This is typically a bad idea. An opponent whose cut lands at this distance is probably trying to deceive me or provoke me out of my position, so stepping into the danger zone is a bad idea. Instead, I should reserve this kind of defense for an opponent who I think is actually going to hit me. In this case, the opponent's blade is an imminent threat, so I need to displace it. At this range, I can omit the step and use a hip turn to create the structure that I need. You might observe that the hip turn doesn't leave us in the standard ox posture, because our feet are actually in the opposite positions to what they would usually be. The posture actually shows up in quite a few places in Meyer's texts. Academic considerations aside, it's just a really useful way of quickly turning our body to the opposite side without a step. It's also worth remembering that Meyer's techniques are extremely flexible. You don't have to start in a prescribed starting position such as elbow or in Wechsel. You can actually start from Flug, or you can cut around from a high position with a cut. The only thing that actually matters is that you can perform an effective displacement in time. The other variable is the angle of incidence of our blade against our opponents. By cutting into ox, we threaten our opponent with the point of our blade. However, we can also cut up into einhorn, which more effectively captures their blade against our crossguard. A third option is to cut up into a hanging point position. This gives us additional protection, but it does sacrifice some of the structure that we gained from the other guards. Let's take a look from the front. You can see cutting into ox, there's a real threat of that point. In einhorn, there's a more noticeable displacement and a capture of the blade on the side, but no threat. And finally, you can see cutting into that hanging point across our body gives us a lot of protection. However, the structure's not good and we'd probably be better off flowing off and cutting around to the other side. Having cut up into a high hanging, we now wind our hands back to the left and step out with a descending cut to the hands or to the head. There's room here for a much more thorough discussion of Meyer's windings and how they apply, but that's a conversation for another time. The main thing to remember here is that that step out drives the cut and the wind down attacks the head or the arms. Once again, the execution of that sidestep is highly situational. It might be slightly forward, it might be to the side, it could even be stepping away and attacking the hands, or if your opponent retreats, you might step forward with it to chase them. The final motion described by Meyer is a cut through the cross. A basic cross cut is a cut which cuts down along the opposite diagonal as the prior cut, so in this case left to right to follow the right to left cut. This cut achieves two goals. Firstly, it attacks our opponent, but secondly, it covers us in case we're retreating or our opponent is counterattacking. While performing this technique, we see an applied instance of Meyer's Schrankhook position. This cross position sets us up to perform a fast cut to the opposite angle. By ending with our point in presence, we discourage the opponent from counterattacking or chasing after us. Let's see the same technique executed a bit faster. Displace, cut, away. All in one flowing action. The simplest variation is to replace that final Oberhau with a Krumpphau or even a Schielhau type motion. This is a little more effective for covering the opponent's blade, so can be useful for giving you a little bit of a margin of safety when you retreat. Our second variation is taken from Meyer's Dussack section. Instead of entering with a low cut, in this case we're entering with a high cut to cover, and then cutting out along the same diagonal with that winding action. Fundamentally the same motion, but just a high cut to begin with. The adaptability of these techniques makes them highly effective even in tournament and competitive scenarios. One of the approaches to Meyer that I've been covering in classes and in workshops over recent years is removal of all the large expressive motions and keeping the minimal subset of actions. This is really useful against opponents who attack with fast linear thrusting techniques. Our big cut under becomes a minor displacement with a lazy einhorn. We flick the point out, and then we simply cover the line instead of a big cut around. Lazy einhorn, flick to the hands, cover the line. And that's it. Now you know how to do the Windthauw. Thanks for watching.